you went to actual medical school. Is that correct?
Yes. Although I will say this, that I abandoned allopathic medicine in favor of returning to the traditional herbalism I was taught. I'm a 5th generation herbalist, and I just find that there are so many more ways to help people doing that than allopathic practice. So my focus is helping people find natural solutions for modern problems mostly.
And I bring that up because, we have a plethora of doctors in our family. And what I hear over and over again is you get this much time, little bit of time spent on health, on food, on eating right, on exercise, it's all of the other things, but this is foundational, how we eat and how we work out.
Definitely. Just to backtrack into what you were saying, which was incredibly important about our mental well-being, in traditional culture, in terms of like our Asian African healing systems and Native American healing systems, there's no way to disconnect our mental and physical well-being. They are seen as one thing. So if someone has a physical ailment, the way that my great-grandmother would talk about it is that there's something going on with them on a spiritual realm. There's a disconnect, psycho-spiritual, like there's something there that is allowing this illness to take place. And when we look at the result of stress on our bodies, when we look at the result of our mental attitudes or any number of things, we see that higher rates of fibroids, we see higher rates of cancer, we see hypertension. I mean, high blood pressure is through the roof. And we know that our stressors relate to that tremendously.
Before you came in, we were having this conversation, Lurie and I, with Jason Wilson, and then we got bombarded. All the lines are still lit. And it was man after man talking about how they were raised to not show, to be men, to not cry, to not show any emotion, to not show any weakness because you're the rock of the family. How does that play out? Because I know you're also Africana's studies. You're also, so there's an overlay of how we were before. So your 5th generation comes with all of that remembering of who we actually were before. How did men behave 5 generations ago?
Well, this is a great question. We of course are still wrestling with and have been wrestling with the legacies of slavery, the unwanted legacies of slavery, which I would say are more than anything that was a potential good outcome of being kidnapped and transported to another place and not having control of your body and your mind and your well-being, in fact, being broken within that capacity. It's amazing how much time and energy is devoted toward therapy for people modernly. I mean, you can't scroll on your phone without being recommended to a therapeutic solution. However, the conversation in this country and in other colonized Western society just doesn't include the trauma that we have experienced. And part of that trauma, especially for Jamaicans, we have conversations a lot about how people were sent to Jamaica or kidnapped from West Africa and brought to Jamaica specifically to break the what they call the cimarrones, the wild ones, the maroons, that these African people who just refused to buckle under the lash. And because of that, sometimes we have a hyper masculinity that takes place that is the defense mechanism that kind of installed itself. We also, interestingly enough, in our African traditions, when we talk about Santeria or Pocomania or Pocomania or Shango or Yoruba practices, we have the ability to shift differently within gender according to the way we're seeing the creator at that moment. And there's a lot of emotion within those ceremonies. So there's this dichotomy of Europeanized toxic masculinity versus the ability to be free floating and fluid.
866-801. Why am I giving out the number? All the lines are already lit. Lurie Daniel Favors is the snapping it and clapping. We're gonna I feel like we need to take time with this, for folks right now who are struggling with how they were raised, right? Because what I said before you guys got here is how we were raised, even like how we eat, the hog muck, the chitlins, the fatback, the oxtails, all of that were the scraps that we made taste delicious because we bring all of the niceness to things, but it's still entrails and tails and stuff. And emotionally, we carry that same entrails type baggage and we make it make sense, but it really is insanity.
It is. If I may, today's Malcolm's birthday, Malcolm X, Malik Al-Haj Shabazz, and I have a special place in my heart for Malcolm because he is intellectually the direct descendant of Marcus Garvey, who is so near and dear. My grandparents were Garveyites in Jamaica when Garvey was alive. And then in Harlem, my father had his interactions with Malcolm. I wouldn't say they were friends, but they weren't enemies. I mean, they knew each other in passing. My parents' first store was located 2 doors from Mosque number 7, which is where Malcolm was. And just the things that I heard about both of these luminaries means so much to me. Malcolm was reported to have said that when we change I to we, like in community, when we change I to we change illness to wellness. And when we look at how deep this brother was going with what we eat, our relationship with foods, think about the fact that Garvey, who was Malcolm's inspiration, Garvey said that we had to look at what we were eating because we were brought to these countries, to the new so-called new world, to farm these things for free. So just sugar, for example, our relationships with sugar as a comfort food, and the fact that we were brought here to toil for sugar, now we're still enslaved to sugar, is something we have to reckon with.
I'm messed up right now. I don't know if anyone else is, because I literally wrote illness and wellness when we change I to we. Okay, I'm done. I'm finished with my show. I'm leaving. Y'all go ahead. Y'all keep talking.
Brother Malcolm was deep.
Thanks, Miss.
Lurie, I'm sure you're feeling that.
Lurie, it's Lurie.
I'm sorry.
Like Morphe with the now. Don't worry, everybody does it. I feel like it's a part of my entree into community. As you were talking about the inability to separate and to distinguish between physical, mental, spiritual wellness, I was looking for this book, which is The Healing Wisdom of Africa, Malidoma Patrice Somé, and I'm sure I mispronounced his name. But he talks he talks a lot in his book about the way, and for people who don't know his story, he talks about how as a young child, he was, I believe, a part of the chieftain line of leadership within his community. As a young child, the missionaries came, and he's from the Dagara community in West Africa. I was going to call the country's name, but I don't want to misstate it. But he talks about how as a young child, the missionaries came, the Christian European missionaries came. He is, instead of going into his initiation, where he is going to transition from childhood into manhood. And as a result of the rules of this community, if you don't go through that transition, you are forever a child. You could be 80 years old. If you didn't go to your initiation, you still like an 80-year-old, 10-year-old. And before he could be initiated, he's taken with the missionaries. He goes and he's indoctrinated into the Christian tradition, and he escapes that, recognizing the harm that was being done to him. He comes back to his community, but he still has to, at like 20-something years old, go through this initiation. Through the course of his initiation, he comes up to the realization, because he has been fully Western indoctrinated. He's like an example of what happened to us over generations in one generation. He's been fully indoctrinated into the Western realm of seeing things, that differentiation, that separation between spirit, soul, and body. And when he is in his initiation process, that's where he learns this is a completely incompatible and inhospitable way of interacting with the world around you. There is no ability to separate your inner wellness from your outer wellness. It's simply as I cannot separate the light from the sun itself. And when he's speaking about that, and I'm thinking about how many ways, and going back to the conversation with Mr. Wilson earlier, we live in such a hyper-segregated society, but to come from an integrative thinking people. And I don't mean integration in terms of the blacks and the whites are all together. I mean, the way we interpret and interact interact with the world is through an integrated lens. Our societies reflect that, as opposed to being in this segregative world where we are in the West. And I've done forgot my question. I'm so enraptured with everything that you said.
Wait, pause. That happened to me last time she was here, Lurie. Last time she was here, I was like, it was like a bomb went off in my head, like a intellectual bomb. And it was like thousands of thoughts and questions came. And then I was like, and I want to ask her this, and then I want to ask her that. And I got all discombobulated. And she sat there doing what she's doing right now, looking at me like I was crazy. And I was like, she got to come back. So continue.
Karen, you just helped me figure out what I was going to say.
I don't know.
Integrated Western medicine and African traditional medicine. That's where I was going with it. Thank you, ancestors. All right. You integrated allopathic Western approaches to medicine with what you already brought to the table from an African-centered way of seeing those connections and combinations. Can you talk a bit about the challenges that, having been, I don't want to use the word infected with Western medicinal knowledge, but how did having that that other type of indoctrination, how did that impact your ability to remain true to the principles of African traditional medicine and healing practices? And did it help you to be a better healer in any way? Did it detract from your ability to, how were you able to synthesize those two diametrically, in some ways, opposed systems, so that you are the phenom that has me up all morning figuring out how many more of your teas I can order before my next?
Well, I love what you said. And just to add to this, and in how continuum works. First of all, I'm a reflection of your perfection, ladies. This is just, we're mirrors of each other, and that's all we are here to do. And thank God for Karen to give amplification to voices is amazing. Malidoma Somé and I have conducted workshops together, and his wife, Sabonfu, who has entered the ancestral realm, and I did a lot of work together, especially revolving around intimacy and how in their village, there's no real word for sex. It encompasses that the ancestors are watching you during this intimacy, that you have a responsibility to the other person, that there's tenderness as we go back to brothers being able to cry, and so there's a release of energy before you can even be intimate, that you have to be honest with each other, or you bring that illness, as we talked about, into the we-ness. You bring your personal illness into the other person's womb or intimate spaces, and that's important to negate and to come to terms and negate it. So I love Malidoma. We've done lots of work since like middle 90s. I'm telling on myself, but that's the case. So
you told us last time you're a grandmother, and I fell off my chair, rolled out into the street. I came back, I tagged the wall. I was like, what the hell am I doing wrong?
I am. Here's what I will say to your question is that in my experience and my friends who've trained, lots of friends who've trained extensively in Western medicine, including like my uncles and cousins and all kinds of people who are dentists and doctors and that kind of thing, is that there's always ways to figure out what's going on as an intervention, like surgical intervention, medicinal, pharmaceutical intervention, but very little, as you said, Karen, like preventative factors or dietary factors. There's very little training in what to eat, how to eat, when to eat, how your emotions and psychology affect your eating. I mean, who among us hasn't felt in the dumps and, or broke up with somebody, or you broke up with someone, whatever, and you then turn to your comfort foods, or you just feel like you needed something crunchy or something sweet or something salty. It's always like sweet or salty, sweet or salty. And we have to come to terms with the way that affects us. I would say that when we talk about our indigenous healing ways, part of the reason why, in my estimation, I'll take the heat on why we are disconnected from that, has so much to do with how we are disconnected from thinking of spirit. So I'm not being critical of Christianity per se. What I am saying is the way that we've been fed, whatever spiritual systems have been overlaid in the new world on us, negates our ability to see nature as Necher, as the ancients would call it, Necher, which is the gods, the everythingness that the word nature comes from. Ancient Egyptians had the word Necher. And so we don't see that nature is, we are that thing. In conducting workshops with Malidoma Somé, we would do ceremonies where people would be buried. I know this sounds bananas, but not your face, but you would lay into the dirt in sort of a pit and release lots of things into the earth that you had been dealing with and just reborn. And so the idea that you're giving these things up, you're an earthling, you're giving them up to the earth, you're starting fresh again. Our abilities to have these processes, rituals, as you spoke of, just because we don't have that, it really limits our ability to deal with our emotions and traumas.
866-801-8255. The nature. Last time you came, we did not talk about you being a witch because, you know, there's all of this stuff associated with it. But I've evolved, because there was a time when I'd be like, oh, I can't have her on the show because I'm not dabbling in witchcraft and I don't have any witches on the show. I'm going to heaven and God's not going to, you know. So, but I've changed. So tell us, what does it mean to be a witch?
Well, you know, I will say that Malidoma Somé considers himself a witch, Sabone Fu, lots of healers, you know, folks that, you know, the way we think of the word witch in the movies, in Hollywood, all of that is not the same way that we are babalaos or we are healers who heal spirit, not just the physical being. We talk about Santeria, we talk about Candomblé in Brazil, we talk about Yoruba traditions, Ghanaian Akan traditions. These are our traditions, and Native American traditions included, that our understanding of things greater than ourselves, we're willing to say we don't totally understand, but we're willing to tap in. So we see a tree, we see an animal, we see things as our compadres, not as enemies, and we respect them. We still have that within African culture modernly. You see a shark, you're like, I'm not going in there. You know, we're not swimming up to stuff. You know, that's the shark's living room. If he bites you, that's your fault. That's his living room. I have my living room. So we have a different relationship. And so when I say witch, sometimes it's to be a bit of a provocateur, because our language needs to be decolonized. The whole impetus behind people like Queen Nanny of the Maroons, of Kojo of the Maroons, of Makandal of Haiti, of Dutty Bookman, who was kidnapped right from Africa and brought to Jamaica to break him. He couldn't be broken, and they sent him to Haiti to break him further. All of these people, what they have in common is that their uprisings were very successful, relatively speaking, their slave rebellions, because they called on ancestors, they called on spirit medicine, they knew herbs. They could either poison slave owners and plantation owners and also heal the people who had been injured physically and otherwise, as our own people had often been traumatized and injured. And this is our medicine. So either you reckon with it or you don't, you know, and the idea of something outside of yourself as greater than yourself is not really where we are.
So one of the things you said, and I know, you know, I hear, I was raised in a very Christian household with a whole lot of African-centered infiltration. And so I remember having conversations, much like what you're talking about. Well, how come they weren't Christians and they got free? And they were tapping into ancestral things, stuff that y'all call ooga booga, but they wasn't enslaved anymore as a result of their ooga booga. I am practicing Christianity. I embrace it. And we've got the white Jesus on our church. And I'm not freer, and I am no more empowered to be free from the oppressive devils in this system. Now, maybe I'm free from sadness. Maybe I got my boost and I'm free from a lot of the things. I remember sitting in churches praying for a house, or praying for sister so-and-so to get a job, or praying for brother so-and-so to find a spouse, or it was usually the verse. But the idea was that as Black Christians, we were praying for things we needed to get on by. And I was always confused by that, because the atheists have houses, they have church, they have all the things that we needed to invoke spirituality for. And so there was that part of it. Then there was a side of it where I knew that when the mothers of the church were talking in tongues, they were having a real conversation, like a whole ass, real ass, sorry, Jesus, conversation in tongues about whatever was happening. When there was an interpretation of the word, I was like, yeah, that there is something real here, but I couldn't understand why the realness of it was only contained and only powerful if it were in the furtherance of this system. And when I read about women, Haitian women who are coming into Louisiana and are chanting and doing voodoo, and then all the chains are broken, I'm like, well, that sounds like Jesus opened up the jail cell to Paul and Silas to me. That's a whole lot more freedom. Feels a whole lot more like what Jesus was talking about than what I'm doing here. But the fear in having to have those conversations. You said that there is a recognition in African and Asiatic and indigenous religious traditions that we don't know all the answers and we don't have to. That is the exact opposite of Western spirituality. We are correct. This is the book. And if you step outside of it, you are absolutely wrong. So much so that you better not be wrong, because if you are, you'll go to hell. Can you talk about the inability for us to find comfort in the unknown? Comfort enough that would allow us to reach back into some of those traditions and bring them forward into the space that we're at now. We got to be able to tap more into spirituality than to get a house. I refuse to believe that's our power.
Everything you've said is so very spot on. I mean, think about this though. How many of our grandmothers and great grandmothers did we learn when the sun is shining and it's raining, the devil's beating his wife? You used to hear that. Or you don't sweep the house at night, or somebody came to the house and you don't want these people, you put salt at the door, or you name it, right? There are a wide variety. Or I don't know if you guys have this, but your grandmother would dream about fish. She'd come and ask each of you if you were pregnant. Like no one would escape, right? The question. we look into a baby's eyes and say, oh, he's been here before. That's my grandfather. That's my great grandfather. We still have that information. We sometimes push it back, but we still have it. The whole idea of the devil being his wife because the sun is shining and it's raining is the story of Shango and Oya, the goddess of storms and the god of thunder and lightning, who carries a double-sided hammer. Sound familiar? Marvel will take our stuff and make amazingly big movies that gross billions of dollars and call it Thor and call it Storm and call it X-Men. And we will reject our own myths, which actually gave birth to myths that are the Norse people, the Irish folk, the Gaelic folk, the other people, their mythos. Even in Italy, I have so many friends from Southern Italy who are in the Shrine of the Black Madonna. There are actual churches where there's a Black woman holding the baby, but we will reject the Osset or Isis and the baby Horus or Heru. Like we will be like, I don't know about that, but that's Mary and Jesus. We have to understand this is a continuum of information. And the moment that we give over our power to somebody else who boxes us in is the moment they take resources, land, your mind, your body, your spirit, promising you something that isn't now, yet they have the now. As you mentioned, they have the now. We have to wait for many mansions. We have to wait for streets of gold. We have to wait for honey and milk. And right now, nothing, just work, just do what we say, just stay in these lines. And really, we have to think about our time, mentality, physical bodies as resources. And who are we giving those resources to?